Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:02. I figure that we can start now. My name is Gil Prus, and I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, and I'm very grateful that you all chose to join us today. I understand, looking outside my window, it's obviously a rather gray and dreary day, but it's important for us to spend some time today talking about obviously the world that we're in and what we are collectively doing to address the challenges of both the COVID and economic crisis that we are facing as a Jewish community, as an American society, and really as a global community in many ways. Just as one note, I'm going to present for a little bit. We're then going to turn it over to Lisa Levy, who is going to moderate and lead the Q&A portion. For those of you who don't know Lisa, she's the past president of the Federation, very involved with many organizations locally, has helped start several organizations locally, and then overall is just an outstanding person. And she will lead, moderate the Q&A. If you have questions during that time, please type them into the Q&A function that's available on your screen, and we will use them to the best that we can. So with that in mind, if I can get my functions to work. Okay, overall, I'm going to be talking through a variety of different pieces. First of all, some understanding of the community needs and priorities and how we are thinking about the challenges that we're facing as a Jewish community today and into the future, some timeline of events, what we have done to date and what we expect to be doing in the near future, the response of the community and some funding decisions, and finally looking at the overall coordinated response. And that really is at the core. So if we want to understand the current dynamic today, what we are doing is trying to understand the challenges that we face as a different lenses. So the first one is really, what are the challenges that individuals face today? If people saw the news this morning, there are another 3.8 million people who applied for unemployment insurance. That brings a total number over the past 6 weeks to more than 30 million people in the United States having applied for unemployment insurance. As an economic challenge as a result of COVID, this is unprecedented in, I think, any of our lifetimes, and possibly significantly beyond that. So what we're trying to do is understand really what are the particular challenges that we face within the community, and how can we most effectively bring support and assistance to the people in need. Some of this is being played out very quickly in terms of people needing cash assistance or people needing medical supplies or food assistance. And some of this will play out over time as the economy, hopefully, as we start opening up again and as the economy starts getting stronger, it will affect different parts of the community in different ways. So we are looking first to understand who are the vulnerable populations within the community and how can we most effectively support them. The second level that we're trying to do is understand the nature of organizations. COVID and the shutdown that resulted from it has affected different parts of the community in very different ways. So for example, the 3 local JCCs have been shut down since mid-March. They've not been able to bring people into the building, though they do run programming in different ways, and they do continue to engage members of their community. But they have faced a particularly significant challenge to their business model with the loss of revenue coming out of the closures. This is very different than challenges that other organizations might be facing. For example, the human service agencies, where they continue to provide services, but they need to do it differently. And so we'll talk a little bit later on. For example, the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes made some important decisions to take care of their clients in significant ways that improve health, but also increased costs. So when we think about the overall community and the challenges that we face, it's not a single set of issues. We actually need to delve into the different parts and how that works. And so that is really what we're trying to do and what we've been actively doing for the past really 6 weeks, if not longer. To address that, so far we have raised $4 million from the community, and we're starting to allocate those funds to make sure that we can address these various needs. And so that's a macro framework looking at individual and organizational needs, because we know that in 12 to 18 months, we need to make sure, looking back, that we've met the needs of people and that we still have a healthy, strong, and vibrant Jewish community. So that's at the very high level, and we can come back to that. If we look over time at what we have done, this is really kind of a timeline laying out from early days when Federation in many ways started working from home on March 16th, and many of the JCCs also stopped functioning when the states announced the closures of public schools, et cetera, over the 6 weeks that have occurred since then. And there have been a variety of different pieces. So one of the early decisions on March 18th was the Federation Executive Committee approving $500,000 from our reserves to an emergency fund, really a day after we moved to create this overall fund for the community. We have conducted 2 different analyses and assessments of organizations in the community to understand where they are and the challenges that they face. And we are now in the process of working with partners to create an individual level assessment to really understand what are the challenges that individual people throughout the greater Washington Jewish community are faced, and what are they dealing with, and how do we best support them? Because at the end of the day, we need to know that we are helping people in need to the greatest degree that we possibly can across the community. And so for us, that is a critical part to this. And so when we look at this, this has been core to it. One of the other things that we did, and if you look right in the middle, around March 29th, we started very early on to partner with all of the local Jewish organizations, whether it's traditional agencies, new organizations, Jewish organizations that have never really participated within the local processes, to help every single one of them apply for the SBA small business loans. Those are critical dollars that enabled small organizations to keep employees on for the next couple of months. And so we worked from day one to provide information, to provide guidance, to provide access to banks. And I'm really happy to say that over the past 2 different funding cycles from the federal government, that the local Jewish organizations have received more than $20 million through this fund. Pretty much every Jewish organization that we know of that applied for these funds received them. And so that's actually a testament to our ability to come together and to collaborate as a community and to bring these resources into our agencies and to support our local needs. This process, this timeline, we are continuing to develop strategies and responses as the circumstances evolve. And so as new things develop, as new government policies, as we start thinking for some organizations, you know, when do places start opening up? When do we start thinking about bringing people back into organizations? What about early childhood come the summer and fall, et cetera, et cetera? We're going to be working across the community to make sure that we are coordinated and that we actually ensure that we're meeting the needs of the people and the community in the best way possible. So far to date, the Emergency Response Committee has approved a series of allocations that are in line with the framework that I described earlier. So if you look here, there are a series of funding decisions that provide loans and cash assistance to the people in need throughout the community. We funded multiple different organizations because different people access cash assistance and support through different parts of the Jewish community. And so whether it's Yad Yehuda or Hebrew Free Loan or distributed fund where rabbis of synagogues can know that we are backstop for them if people come to them for support, or JESA, or if you look on the following slide, other organizations, the Adel Fund, et cetera, we want to make sure that people can have access to cash when they need it in order to be able to buy food, pay for electricity, pay rent, pay mortgage, etc. This was critical for what we were doing. On top of that, we also provided loans to 3 different organizations as they sought to address the challenges that they face. And for some of these, this is as they were applying for SBA loans. And for others, it's incrementally to make sure that they have the resources to make it through the next several months with increased expenses and decreased revenue. Coming out of this, we need to have a strong, vibrant, connected, and healthy Jewish community. And so these were some of the initial allocations that were approved in order to support that process. The conversations are continuing. The Emergency Response Committee that is co-chaired by Susie and Michael Gelman and Melanie and Larry Nussdorf is continuing to meet. We are continuing to have conversations with agencies and organizations throughout the community to make sure that we are there even as they seek to move forward and sometimes make some very tough decisions. For example, the POSES JCC of Northern Virginia made the tough decision that they needed to lay off or furlough approximately 80% of their employees. They didn't know exactly when they were going to open, and they wanted to make sure that they had the financial capacity to open up their programs when that time was available. So these are organizations making some tough decisions, but we need to make sure that as a community, we can all be there for each other. One other part that we have done as we have moved forward and as we've really thought about the nature of the Jewish community is to create a mechanism for people to connect with each other, to support each other in times of need. And so, for example, you might have seen articles about this in local or national newspapers about people creating these hubs within their neighborhoods or families where they help out each other. Someone may go get medicine for a senior who is at home and may not have any family members around, and they may help with food shopping. One of the things that we're trying to do throughout this process is think to ourselves, what is the nature of the Jewish community that we want when this is over? In 12, 24, 36 months, what is that Jewish community that we're trying to build? And obviously it's one where we take care of each other, where we care for the most vulnerable. It's also one where we have the organizations that connect people to Jewish community and Jewish life. And finally, it's one where we care for each other, where we are there as individual human beings, helping each other in a one-to-one basis, where we have deep ties and use those ties to strengthen the network of Jewish life. And so this idea of the JayConnector initiative is really about connecting people right now, but in a way that goes beyond the particular crisis in which we live. And so that is really at the core of what this initiative is. And if you are interested in creating a group or moving forward, please go to the JayConnect platform on the Federation website. There's a toolbox there, et cetera, to help you do that and a lot more information. And finally, when we think about the Federation within the context right now, there are really just a few guidelines that we use. We know that the needs facing the Jewish community are going to shift and evolve over time. We understand, and have some sense of the challenges that we face today. But what about 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or 12 months from now? And so what we're trying to do, as I said in the beginning, is tackle those most critical issues today while building the type of community that we want for the future. We don't exactly know what the challenges are going to be in 6 months. We don't know what the answers are going to be that we need to tackle or the issues that we need to resolve at that point. But we do know is if we're able to build a strong communal culture that comes together to address the most critical issues as they evolve over time, we will have the communal capacity to address anything. And that's really at the core. How do we bring all of us together to think through these issues, to enable each one of us to help out and tackle this as we go forward, and to build a stronger Jewish community over time. And that's the framework that is constantly above us, is constantly driving every one of our decisions as we go forward. And with that, I really just want to end with our vision and mission. The vision continues to drive everything that we do: an open, connected, and vibrant Jewish community that cares for each other, fosters Jewish learning and journeys, embraces Jewish peoplehood in Israel, and acts as a force for good in the world. And if you look at the first part of the mission statement, to inspire, build, and sustain vibrant Jewish life in a changing world, what is more important than that today? We are in a rapidly changing world. We know that things will change, but we also know that if we have strong relationships, if we come together, if we seek guidance from each other, then we will be able to tackle whatever's in front of us. And that really is the core of where we are and what we're trying to do. So thank you very much for joining. We're now going to move to Q&A. And really, I'm going to turn this over now to Lisa and then to you. And I will try to answer as best as I can. If there are certain things that I don't answer fully the way that you may want, feel free to reach out afterwards as well. Thank you. Lisa.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to find out more about what our Federation is doing in the community during this difficult and challenging time. And thank you to Gil. And before I even begin, there will be an opportunity. We've received some questions in advance, which we will be tackling first. And then at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a small Q&A. If you have questions that you feel have not yet been answered or have been covered, please type your questions in there, and then there will be time at the end to answer the questions that are coming in now this morning. So thank you for that. So Gil gave us a very broad-based overview of what Federation is doing. And I think that kind of gave you a view as to where our community is right now. As you heard, there are a lot of changes happening in our community. We're working across a broad spectrum, not only with our partner agencies, but with organizations who have never really partnered with us before, have never ever come to Federation before, and it's really building a strength in community that we're seeing that is really so encouraging. The question that we have for you, Gil, is, as our community is being impacted by coronavirus, how do we as a Federation approach the work of taking care of the entire community? And before answering the question, can you define what we mean by entire community? Who's applied for funds? Who's receiving funds? How are we managing all of this?
Great question. And so obviously the term entire community is, there are multiple levels to it. One of the things that we realized very early on is that the vibrancy of the Washington Jewish community is created by many different organizations. And it is traditional partners of Federation who have worked closely with us for many years. It is synagogues with whom we've worked in a wide variety of ways. It is organizations perhaps with whom we might not have worked with in the past, but who help shape and build the fabric of Jewish life in this region. As we thought about what we needed to do, we broadened the definition as widely as possible. So really any organization that is part of the fabric of Washington Jewish life, we are working with. So when I talked about the SBA loans, we've reached out to everyone in terms of supporting them and helping them. As we think about where we need to go, we are doing that as well. And so that's one level of wanting to make sure that coming out of this, that we engaged and supported all the different parts of the Washington Jewish community. The other part that we're thinking about also is when you say entire community, is a question that we will be tackling is what is the responsibility of the Jewish community to the broader community? And there are many leaders within the Jewish community who are actively engaged and support the broader community. I was on a call this morning with one of them who's very involved with a variety of nonprofits in DC to help vulnerable populations. And so we are also looking at how do we do that? How do we support that? What is the role of the Jewish community as a Jewish community in addressing needs within the Jewish community, but also addressing the needs beyond? And that is a core question that we are looking at as well as we go forward.
Okay. Thank you, Gil. Just to follow up on that, another question that has been asked is, you spoke about organizations receiving loans versus grants. How can you differentiate between the two? You know, are loans expected to be paid back?
Right. So it was a big conversation that we had as we thought about the loans versus grants. And part of the question that we've been having is, on the one hand, we've raised $4 million to date, and that sounds like a significant sum of money. But the reality is that the needs across the Jewish community are going to be significantly beyond $4 million, particularly as we look over the next several months. And so what we wanted to do was think about the funding in two different ways. We wanted to be able to respond quickly as the agencies needed resources, as organizations needed funding so they could address their needs. We didn't want to be afraid to provide critical resources. On the other hand, we didn't want to spend 25% or more of the available funds within the first few weeks of a crisis, because we believe this is going to be 6, 12 months as we look at the challenges that different organizations face. Summer camps, day schools, synagogues, human service agencies, et cetera, et cetera. These things are going to evolve. So we've been trying to balance the speed of response to help all the organizations that need them now, while also making sure that there are resources over time. Will some of these loans turn into grants? Absolutely. On the other hand, will some of them still be loans and get paid back so they can be used for different organizations that may be facing crises in 4 to 5 months? That is also true as well.
Thank you. So we're going to come back a little bit more to funding decisions. A couple questions have come up regarding that. So I'm going to put that aside for a moment. And I want to talk a little bit about the impact of Corona. Clearly, a lot of, you said in your introduction, a lot of work is being done currently to partner with organizations and individuals. But looking down at the long-term impact of this pandemic on our community, things will look, as we know, very different coming out of this. And some organizations will do better than others. What early planning and is Federation putting in place looking 6, 12, and even 2 years down the road? And how are we facilitating these conversations with our agencies to help them with the changes that they will have to face? And some will be really difficult, hard decisions. So
right. So there are decisions at several different levels and conversations at several different levels that are happening. So first of all, we are convening our local organizations and synagogues on a weekly basis. Some of this is to provide information, and a lot of it is for them to learn from each other. So for example, just yesterday, there was a conversation among different organizational partners. How do you still make money for programs in a world when all content is just distributed? When you can go online and connect anywhere around the world, which you could before, but now everyone is doing that. How do you still make money? And there were some ideas, and there was a lot of conversation. So some of it is just getting together, sharing information, building relationships. As we look forward, there are going to be a couple of different kinds of conversations that we have. You know, do we need to think about how organizations partner in a different way? Can we create some much deeper partnerships between different organizations who work in similar domains. And we're going to have to look at that. Are there ways to save money or to increase the impact that we have? The other part, though, is there was a recent article by Tom Friedman in the New York Times, and he talked about kind of in basketball, the pivot step, where basically you put, one foot has to stay where it is, and you can move the other foot around as you decide what is the best direction to go. As a Jewish community, we need to decide what are the core values of that foot that we put down. What are those criteria? What's that framework that is defining who we are, around which there could be other ideas and creative energy as we understand what has gone on and what new programs are there, how are people connecting, etc. So we're going to be convening over the next month or so different professional leaders and different lay leaders to think through some of that. Synagogues, for example, have learned a tremendous amount of how they can engage people and how people join, whether it's in learning or worship or other forms of engagement. Other agencies are figuring out ways to connect with people. So are there things that we can take from today into the future? And that's going to be one conversation. The other part, though, which worries me, and is going to be something that we have to think about, is, they talk about crises like this as being defining moments in people's lives, right? I mean, people who lived through the Great Depression, which obviously it was a very long time, that shaped their identity and how they connected and decisions that they made. A worry with this one is that, will we feel the same way coming back together, being with people, being part of that, a community that gathers, which has been so central to the Jewish community? How will that affect what we do going forward? And how can we work to bring that back? Is there a way to still, when we're able to gather, when we're able to come together in person, to reestablish that sense of community and connection? And so there's certain things that we want to build on that may make us stronger. And there's certain things that we need to think about is, how do we counteract some of those dominant forces that may be out there, but could weaken Jewish community if we're not able to address them.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back now to funding decisions. And you spoke earlier about the creation of a volunteer-led emergency response committee, or ERC, as we affectionately call it now. Talk a little bit about how the funding decisions are being made by the ERC and what organizations are being considered, what allocations may be next. We know some organizations applied in the first round, didn't receive, but there's a second round coming. So address some of those issues.
Right. So as I mentioned, the Emergency Response Committee has 4 co-chairs, Michael and Susie Gelman, and Melanie and Larry Nussdorf. There are another probably 12 people or so on the committee, made up of people who've been involved with allocation processes, people who have been involved with agencies and donors, a variety of people who bring different perspectives into the process. What we are trying to do, recognizing that this is a long horizon, is we are reaching out. So first, staff is reaching out to all the different local organizations. We're in constant conversation to understand what are the challenges that different organizations are facing, building on the first needs assessment that was done the week of March 16th. So very early on, we reached out to also understand the timing of when different organizations were projected to have needs. So for some of them, they said, we're fine now, but we may think that come September, when people are coming back after the summer, we may have that. So that was a little bit of a slower process. And others said, for example, the JCCs, now is an issue. We need to think about it. Our buildings are closed, et cetera. So we've been reaching out to organizations as well as they've been reaching out to us. Each time we try to understand what are the drivers and the challenges that they are facing, what are they doing about it, and how can philanthropy help address those particular challenges. We meet with the lay and professional heads of the agencies, gather a bunch of information, understand what we are doing, what philanthropy can help, and then have them present to the co-chairs, and then have the committee to discuss it. These are very serious conversations with the goal that is being held by everyone, really those two things that I laid out in the beginning of how do we make sure we help individuals in the community who may be struggling. There's some people who were struggling before or on the margin, and this really made it more significant. There are people who never faced any issues before and were fine, but because of COVID, either now they are isolated seniors, or there are new challenges that they're facing as a community, or they lost their job, or whatever it might be. How do we respond to those people? And that's number one. And the second thing is really about the organizations. And so in every conversation, we're trying to bring both of those pieces together, gathering information from the agencies in the community, looking at it carefully. What can philanthropy do? What other resources are available to help them? And then making decisions.
Thank you. So it sounds like it's a very comprehensive approach and has its tentacles far out and wide in the community. So thank you. So the community response to date, I'm sure like many of us on the webinar today are connected with many different organizations and agencies in the community. And you've said a little bit about what Federation is hearing from them, and there have been some really positive testimonials. Do you want to address some of what you've been hearing since this work started?
Yeah, so it's been very interesting. Clearly, the other organizations that we are funding, that we're supporting, I mean, they're on the front line, right? What we're able to do as a federation is, one, bring critical resources and mobilize people in a common conversation, right? Have some thoughts and engagement across the whole community. So we have to understand kind of what we can do and also our limitations. We're not the front line of helping individuals. We're not the front line of providing cash to people or providing human services, but we can look across the whole community. And so the responses that we've gotten from the agencies have been really along those lines. On the one hand, very grateful that we're able to bring incremental resources to what they're doing. So Yad Yehuda, knowing that they have more money to buy kosher food for their pantry as the food starts running out, that we're able to provide those dollars, so that they have money that they can provide to people as they come in, $1,000, $1,500, etc. So that is at one level. The second one is from several agencies saying something along the following. So I'm paraphrasing, but basically, they're all focusing on the viability and the vitality of their own organization, right? So a day school, are they providing Jewish education the way it needs to be now? Do they have the resources going forward? That's what they're focusing on. They need to know that we are there behind them, thinking about those same issues, but at a different level. And how do we make sure that as a community, we are supporting? How do we make sure that as a community, we are bringing people together and thinking about the larger issues that we faced, whether it's around access to the SBA loans or incremental resources, or making sure that they're partnerships. So it's that set of relationships that have actually been incredibly important and that the agencies have been grateful for. Our job is not to provide Jewish education directly, but our job is to make sure that those organizations that are doing that are able to do that now and into the future. Same thing with human services and cash assistance. We don't do it directly, but we make sure through everything that we can do that they can do their job well, and they have the resources and the support and the access and the capacity now and for the next many years going forward.
Thank you. A question came in, and I just want to let you know that the majority of the questions that were early on we've been going through, but several questions are still coming in. And if you want to ask questions through the Q&A, please feel free to do that, because we're now able to address some of those questions. A question came in regarding Federation went through a pretty broad-based strategic plan in the last year and set up a number of task forces working on the 3 priority areas of Northern Virginia and families with young children and young adults. As a result of this COVID-19 pandemic, how is Federation managing that work now?
Right. So that's a really, really good question. So just as a reminder, thank you, Lisa, for bringing that one up. The Federation completed its strategic plan about a year and a half ago. And we highlighted 3 areas based on both core components of what shape a strong Jewish community and also key demographic groups in Washington. So for example, the recognition that 41% of the Jewish community lives in Northern Virginia, that we're a magnet community for young adults who move to Washington and stay here. We're not necessarily transient, but we are a magnet community for many people. And also understanding the deep value of Jewish learning and how that shapes a community and its overall fabric. And so we have been focused on raising incremental resources for those areas and moving forward on that. Each year we have had fields of interest and allocation processes, et cetera, and have partnered with many existing and new organizations to move that forward. When COVID hit, we definitely took a step back and said, is this still viable? Is this still the right approach for what we're doing? Should we not do it? Should we just focus on other issues? Should we just focus on human services and not on engagement of these populations, for example? And we talked about that at great length, and we decided the following, that we need to be able to do both things simultaneously, that the strategic plan and the vision that we have for vibrant Jewish life is still relevant. We still have a lot of young adults who are looking for connection. We still have 41% of the Jewish community living in Northern Virginia. And so we can't stop the overall strategy. Now, within that, do we need to think about what programs do we run or not? What's viable or not? If people are gathering or if they're not gathering, we need to make sense of that and think that through. But we need to be able to bring resources to bear for the crisis at hand and address that while at the same time still moving forward with our core strategies, our core efforts to strengthen Jewish life. And that is really the balance that we're trying to pursue.
I think talking about the strategic plan as well, you know, we always spoke about geographic boundaries. And I think what we're dealing with now pulls all boundaries down. And whether you're in Northern Virginia, in DC or Maryland, I think we can all access each other through the vehicles we've chosen, which is, I think, one of the pluses of being in this awful situation. Another question that's come through, and actually what I'm doing is I'm going to take a few questions and sort of roll them into one, and maybe you can tackle them that way. So how is Federation continuing to reassess individuals' unmet needs? For example, seniors who still need meals, and what is the plan in that avenue? Jews who have not historically been involved in the Jewish community, how do they even know where to begin to access information? And then talking about vulnerable women who might be more vulnerable now, particularly when we talk about the increase in domestic violence during this kind of crisis. So,
yeah, so those, it's at several different levels. So at one level, and we recognize that it may not be the full Jewish community that's currently going to the Jewish organizations and accessing services there. And so we're trying to do a couple of different pieces, one on that side first. So in the next month or so, we will be sending out an individual level survey to understand from people what challenges they're facing, what are the issues that they are seeking help for, whether it's from within the Jewish community or beyond. And we're going to be working with as many people and organizations as possible, to get that survey out, asking people to forward it to their friends, social networks, all synagogues, organizations, people who work with different segments of the Jewish community. Our goal is to get as many responses as possible to give us the best sense of what is going on in the Jewish community. That's at one level. Another one is that we're going to be working hard, and we've started, but we're going to accelerate getting information out. People will seek help from the Jewish community if they know that the Jewish community will be there to help if they call. If we don't have the resources, or if we don't have the systems there in place to respond, people learn very quickly not to call. They'll call someplace else. And so we want to make sure that people are aware that we are there and that we can help and that we have resources and we have people at the other end of a phone if someone needs assistance. And we're working hard to create more integrated efforts across our organizations, and then get that information out there. So we're working very hard to move that along. That's one of the top priorities that we have. In terms of particular needs, whether it's seniors needing food, or rise in domestic violence, we're working with those organizations. So it's working with JayConnect, where they initially had a drop in the number of phone calls because people were basically locked into homes with their abusers and they couldn't call. And initially there was a drop. That has changed significantly over the past couple of weeks as people have learned that this isn't going to be over very quickly and they are seeking help. So we're working with JayConnect to make sure that they have the capacity to respond and support all the people who call there and to really help them out. And with the seniors, there are several organizations that are out there, whether it's JCA or JESSA that provides meals and other things. I did note the particular chat and agree that we should be reaching out to the people who have participated in previous programs to see if they need help. And I think that's an important issue. So thank you for raising that one.
Okay, another question that just came in, and keep your questions coming because I think they're all very thoughtful and really cover a lot of ground. You, Gil, mentioned that Federation has said that all local or Jewish organizations, agencies or non-agencies, received SBA loans. And the question came in that this person had heard that JUFJ actually, and Avodah did not receive loans. Can you clarify and talk about first round, second round?
So that's a good question. We have not heard from them. I don't know if they applied, if Avodah applied locally or nationally. JUFJ, I'm not sure if we had heard back from them, but it's something that we should find out. JUFJ has not been denied. Oh, got it. Okay, thank you, Jill. Jill Hertzler, who works at JUFJ, said that they were not denied. Just on that, Jill, if you need any help, reach out afterwards. But the organizations that we were in contact with who did not get it the first round did receive it the second round. And so I guess the broader comment, if you know organizations or you're involved with any organizations that applied and did not receive funding, please reach out and we will see what we can do. But I just wanted to let you know that. Because those resources are obviously very important to sustain employment and the local Jewish organizations.
Okay, another question, Gil, is how, and I think you might have covered this, but not in the specific. How is Federation distinguishing between different types of organizations? For example, Sixth and I, is that seen as a synagogue or more of as a JCC type of organization? And how does the approach differ for different organizations?
Yeah, so Sixth and I is interesting. I guess they're both a synagogue and a JCC in different ways. The reality for them is that they also had to close their building and they had to move online just like other organizations. In certain ways, if you think about it from a business model perspective, they are more like a JCC in that they got their revenue by people paying to come to programming that was held there, unlike a synagogue where you have your annual dues that you pay over the course of time. And so part of this is to understand not just the content, but how the organizations are able to sustain themselves. So for a synagogue, every month I pay part of I have my monthly dues, and they're going to be facing the challenges for synagogues, whether it comes up to the renewal timeline or whether they can have services for the high holidays come the fall. And that's going to be a different challenge the synagogues face. For Six and I, they need to be thinking about, and I know that they are, how do they sustain community? How do they continue generating resources and revenue even when their content is online? And so we will be working with them on that front as well.
Okay. We've spoken a lot on this call about how Federation is helping the Jewish community, but I'm sure a lot of people who have the ability are looking for ways that they too can help. So are there some ideas, some things that you know could be helpful for people on this call to share with others and do themselves?
So from an individual level, we do have many resources on the JayConnect website. If you go to the Federation JayConnect website, there's a long list of resources, both for you as an individual if you want them, but also ways to make a difference. Ways to volunteer online, ways to help out other parts of the community. So for anyone, whether you want to do it yourself, whether you have a college student who's about to finish their semester of classes and figuring out what to do for the next several months, there are multiple ways to continue helping out. And so I would encourage you to go to that website. And there are organizations within the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community. There's a lot of need out there. And I know sometimes it feels like it's hard to help and make a difference, particularly if you can't go physically to a location. But even beyond that, there are ways to make a difference that you are using your time and energy that go beyond sending a check or giving money to a particular organization.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Gil. Right now we have no new questions. I think we've covered pretty much everything that came in. And so I thank all of you on this call for your thoughtful questions and concerns. And unless anybody has any more burning questions, I think the Q&A piece of this conversation is over.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for joining. If you have further questions or would like any more information, please feel free to reach out. And I appreciate everyone joining for this webinar. Thank you. Have a good day. Stay healthy. And Shabbat Shalom a little bit early, but it's coming up fast. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gil.